Now let's take a look in how we can create those air vents. Actually, quite simple. So for example, on the back part, we have multiple air vents and also in the front part. And again, like I mentioned during class, there are multiple definitions of what 3D modeling can be used for. You can model very precisely and accurately if you want to rep a prototype or manufacture something. But you can also use 3D modeling as an extension of two-dimensional hand sketching. So you sacrifice precision a little bit and fine details, but rather focus on proportion, details, your design concept. So to simulate, for example, where I would like those air vents to be, I can add a cube. Now, of course, this cube is very big, so maybe 5 millimeters by 5 millimeters by 5 millimeters. So I make a small one. And I want to make sure that this cube, for example, is, in my case, along the x-axis lined up with my main object. So if I click my hand mixer body, I see it's 0. So this one should be 0 as well. And for example, I'm going to right away name this object air and back. Okay, so Control 1 on the numpad goes actually to the back view. So 1 is front, Control 1 back view. Then I go into edit mode, and with everything selected, I press S and X, and then scale it along the x-axis, and I overshoot quite a lot. Perfect. And then maybe I move it to here, like there. Okay, great. Now, I would like to have this air vent geometry be replicated vertically down. And I could do this by hand, Shift D all the time, but then I have to line up all these objects by hand, and that's quite possible, but very labor intensive. So instead, I can use an array modifier. So I can see that negative z, that's the direction I would like those parts to be replicated along. So my count maybe should be, let's say, 5. But then instead of along positive x, I type in 0, it should be negative z, and I type in -2. And again, the meaning of 1 or 2 means with -1. The next arrayed element will be placed just by this dimension of one object by itself. If, for example, I type in -2, the next arrayed object will be placed 2 times away in relationship to how thick, for example, the geometry is. So if I, for example, turn this one off, so you can see I can use this object twice, and then you have the next one. If we set this one by -2.5, it's actually going to be moved away by 2.5 times the volume of that object. Okay? So this is not really like dimension or centimeters or inches, it's just more in reflection to how big the main object is. The nice part is, if I go into edit mode and, for example, press S, Shift X, because I only want to scale along Z and Y, you see everything stays in relationship. So I have one master object I can scale, and everything else then follows. So, for example, I can move this one in a little bit. Okay. So how do we now, for example, cut those patterns out of the main tube? If your geometry is clean and doesn't have any problems and is watertight, I can set this one back maybe to 1, maybe 2. Actually, for the speed, I will set it to 1. I know that here the geometry is kind of crooked, but again, all I'm doing right now is just exploring an idea, so I don't have to be very concerned about beauty right now. So with this object selected, I could go to Add Modifier and select Boolean. And the Boolean operator basically gives you 3 options. You can create a difference. So this means I can subtract another object out away from my main hand mixer. I can add a volume to this hand mixer body, or I can calculate the intersecting volume of my hand mixer and a target object. What I want those air vents to be cut out, so I can go difference. And this object is called air vent back. So inside object here, if I click, I have air vent back. I click it, and if I go into wireframe mode, you should immediately see a result like this. And maybe those cubes I can move to a different layer because they are kind of like blocking my view. So with the cube selected, I could either go to object, move to layer, or I simply in 3D view press M and then 2 and move my mouse away, and then it's moved. You see now they're here. And the last modifier to add is maybe an edge split. Edge split, you can see, gets rid of those shading artifacts. The shading artifacts don't necessarily mean that your mesh is damaged or something, it's just a visual representation. There, one looks quite okay. The nice part about this is now maybe we could, for example, this is maybe a little bit too big, so I change the proportion a little bit. I'm going to edit mode, leave edit mode, and you see then this calculation is updated. But now it's not really long enough, so maybe I say -3. Let's see how this looks. So I move this one up, and you can see that actually I can move those objects, and then in real time it goes up and down like this. Yeah, okay, let's keep it that way. Okay, so that's, for example, how I can do the air vents in the back. Now, for a moment, let's go to the product page, and you see that there are some air vents in the front as well. So let's do it there then. So I select my front cylinder, cursor to selected, simply because now I'm going to add a cube. And then again, this cube, I quickly scale down. Okay. By pressing the period on the numpad, I can zoom in to my object. Maybe in edit mode, actually, I move this one up somewhere to there. Oops, actually I wanted this object not to change. So cursor to selected, Shift S, selection to cursor. Because what I'm going to do now is I can mirror this one. And for example, press Z. So I can see at the same time this part to stick out. Now I could maybe move this one over a little bit to there. And then I could say also mirror over along the x-axis. Okay. Maybe we'll zoom this one closer. Okay. Maybe scale it a little bit. So if you only have, for example, 4, you could use the mirror modifier. If, of course, you would like to have multiple cuts, for example, here there we see there are 4 very closely to each other. Yeah, then of course, if you want to work precise, you would have to do it slightly different. So I can create again a cube and just scale it down. And then again in edit mode, maybe I move this one up a little bit to there. And they seem to be really wide, so along X I scale it slightly together. Then again I can use a mirror modifier along Y. And the reason why I moved the cube in edit mode actually up was simply so it's using the 3D reference point of my air vent geometry as the axis to mirror everything down along the z-axis. And then I can add another array modifier. Here, for example, it's 1.25 or maybe 1.5, something like this. 4, and then I can try to move this one in. Maybe like this a little bit. Okay. Let's maybe call this one air vent front. Can also put this one onto the second layer already, because here for this one I can add the Boolean modifier, difference, air vent front, and then add an edge split. Okay. So you see it's basically nearly the same process. Maybe those air vents are a little bit too big, so I just scale them down a little bit more. They really look very, very bulky. And let's move those over to there. Yeah, something like this maybe. Okay. That looks a little bit more industrial and functional. Okay. So this concludes then like basic application of the Boolean modifier. And you never really want to hit actually apply on those, because all we try to do is in this environment in Blender generate surfaces which then later we can export and bring into whatever industrial design application for some refinement work. And in case you would click apply, I'm going to save this model for a moment so you can see what actually happens. So you see this one is my original sphere geometry. And interactively, I'm going to apply all those modifiers. So my air vents are cut out, but they're not really like physically cut out. It's just a real-time effect. And the moment I click apply, it really starts cutting the stuff out. And then you end up with stuff like this. So it's not really what you want. So never click apply for those modifiers. At least not for Boolean. Sometimes with the subsurface or the array ones, there we can do it. But I will go into that in later assignments as well.